Hello, welcome to our Key Stage 2 Music Assembly. Now, we're not going to be doing singing assemblies for the moment. Even in our classrooms, we've decided that it's better if we look at music in a different way, just until we can be absolutely sure that we can do singing safely together. So, by all means, when you go home, have a sing, please do. It's really good for your emotional well-being, for your happiness, and for your health and fitness. Using your lungs is a good thing. But in school, we're going to approach it a different way. Now, many of you may have had a look at the morning music when we weren't at school and when we were having a go at drawing to the different pieces of music we listened to. Maybe you didn't, but if you did, you'll remember that we listened to the music, and while we listened to it, we were actually drawing and responding to the music, thinking, how does this music make me feel? That might be a picture, it might be shapes, it might have a lot of colour, it might be black and white, it might be pencil, it might be pen. You can choose all that yourself. Decide how the music makes you feel. And each week we look at a different composer. So in this assembly, we're going to look at the composer Debussy. Claude Debussy lived in the second half of the 19th century, and he died in 1918, right at the end of the First World War. He was called the first Impressionist composer. Now, that word Impressionist is something you might have heard talking about painters like Monet and Cézanne and Renoir, but actually it was applied to music as well. It's important to say that Debussy did not like being called an Impressionist composer at all. But the thing is, even though he went to music college when he was 10, he was a very gifted young musician, he didn't actually publish his first composition and have a success with it until he was 40, and that was an opera called Pelléas and Mélisande. Debussy thought that the old way things had been done, particularly the German tradition with composers like Wagner, was boring. He didn't like the symphonies of Mozart and Beethoven. He thought this thing where you had first movement, second movement, third movement, and then later on 1, 2, 3, 4 movements. He thought it was all very controlled and restrained, and he wanted music to be able to express actually a kind of impression of feeling. So he really was an impressionist composer. So Debussy has composed a piece of music called Clair de Lune, which is the French for moonlight. And this piece of music really is trying to give the impression of being in moonlight, what moonlight feels like. Moonlight feels like. Can I say that? Yes, I got it out. What it feels like, what emotionally it feels like, what the experience of being in moonlight is. And so when he was writing symphonies, he didn't want to have first movement, second movement, third movement. He wanted his symphonies to be sketches. So there's quite a good link here with drawing and art and Debussy's music, which would help us. The last thing I want to tell you about Debussy is that in 1889, there was a celebration, 100 years since the French Revolution. 1789 was a big date for French people. It's when they got rid of their king and decided to be a republic instead. And they were celebrating this in 1889. And they had a big world fair where they invited people from all over the world to come and exhibit elements of their culture, of their technology, of their art, of their music. And one of the things that came to this fair was a Javanese gamelan orchestra. Now, if you've never heard a gamelan orchestra, I recommend you Google it, you search it out, because it's amazing. We did have a gamelan orchestra come into the school about 3 or 4 years ago, and they were wonderful. They are beautiful metal drums hanging in frames that can all be played almost like a glockenspiel. But instead of being little solid metal bars, they are hollow, and the sound is quite wonderful. Well, when Debussy heard this, he was blown away, and a lot of his music was really influenced by that Far Eastern music. The idea that music should be set in the formal structures that Western music had been set in was just boring to Debussy. He wanted something more free, more fluid, more of an impression. But don't call him an impressionist to his face, he wouldn't have liked it. Right, so here's what we're going to do now. We're going to have a listen to this beautiful piece of music, Clair de Lune. We're going to have some paper in front of us and we're just going to draw. It doesn't have to be of anything, but if it makes you feel like you want to draw a moonlight scene, maybe some trees and fields, or maybe somebody looking at the moonlight, or a face, or a hand, or a cat, that's up to you, but you might also just want to draw squiggles and wiggles. So have a listen.